Okay, everybody, today we're going to look at bar chords. We're going to look at E shapes and A shapes, kind of the most common bar chords that we strive to learn, especially first. There are other bar chords, there are other chord shapes that we can use, but we're going to look at E and A, hopefully learn what they're called depending where they are. But beyond the basic major, minor sevenths, major sevenths, and some of the sus chords we'll try, there's a few chords that are easy to finger and have a cool sound. And you'll find these chords called up in some of the chord charts that you come across. So we're going to start with the E in the open position. So basically, a bar chord, you're taking that index finger, you're barring all 6 strings in most cases, and you're using these 3 strings to place them to kind of duplicate the shape of the E chords shapes and the A chord shapes, from the open position. So we'll just quickly review the chord shapes. And we'll start with the E. So, we have an E major. It's basically just 3 notes, the 1, the 3, and the 5. And then there's some other duplicated notes in there because you can play all 6 strings, okay? But you are playing that 1, the 3, and the 5. But that's an E major shape, of course, okay? So when we bar it, okay, we have to use this finger and sort of take the place of that nut if we're going to slide it up. And I'll show you the bar position. We'll always go to the 5th fret. So if we bar that 5th fret and we try to, play that E shape, that E major shape, okay? What chord is that? Well, it's the root note would be on that low 6th string or the E string, and this note, and you should know the notes at least on the E string and preferably on the 5th string or the A string. So if you know those notes, you know that when you bar, that lowest note is going to be an A. So when we play that major shape here, that E major shape, we are playing an A major. Okay? So that's kind of how you figure out where you are on the fretboard if you're playing that E-shaped chord. It's whatever that bass note is on the 6th fret, okay? Or on the E string. In the case on the 3rd fret, that is a G note, so that is a G major chord. Okay, what other chords are there? Of course, there's the minor, which may have been the first chord you learned. It's really easy to finger in the open position. Of course, barred at the 5th. That would be an A minor, okay? And then we have a minor 7th. So what a minor 7th is, where the minor chord would be 3 notes, the 1, okay, the root note, the minor 3rd, and the 5th. A minor 7th is those 3 notes plus a 7th, or I should say a flatted 7th, okay? And in this case, if we just lift our ring finger, or depending on how you finger it, you just open up the D string, or the 3rd string, okay, and that's adding a 7th to that minor, so it's an E minor 7th, okay? Played at the 5th fret, okay? Just need 1 finger. I fret it with my ring finger, okay? So that is an A minor 7th because the root note is there, okay? So we have a minor 7th. But there's 2 other ways that I know that you can play a minor 7th other than just with that 1 string fretted. You can put your pinky on the B string 3rd fret because that also is a minor 7th note, all right? And that cuts through a little bit more. So, and you can play that shape again at the 5th fret, ring finger, pinky, okay? And you hear how that 7th note kind of sticks out. So sometimes you want it, sometimes you don't. All right. Okay, so that's another way you could play a minor 7th. You can also kind of revert, go back to the same E minor that you started with, and put your pinky, so you're fretting, you know, both the A string and the D string at the second fret, and get that pinky in there. Okay, maybe it has a little bit different sound. Okay, and can you do it up here? Yes, you can. It's a little bit more of a stretch where you're using these two fingers to fret the A and the D string, you know, on the second fret from the bar, and then put that pinky down on the third fret from the bar on the B string. Okay, and that's an E minor seventh. So there's three ways to play a minor seventh. There is actually a fourth way, okay, and basically that is almost barring all the strings at the fifth except the A string, okay? And the way I do that is I wrap my thumb on that fifth fret, the E string, because I want that note to ring, but I'm sort of using my thumb, or in this case, even my ring finger, to sort of mute the A string. But I am fretting the four higher strings at the fifth fret. So it's kind of like, you know, you're playing fifth, not playing that, or X, and then it's 5, 5, 5, 5. Okay, and that is that's an A minor seventh, because again the root is right here. Okay, so if you ever need a G minor seventh, okay, A minor seventh, B minor seventh, C minor seventh, and onward. The key here is you're not fretting all the strings because you want to mute that A string. All right, so that's just another way to play a minor seventh. So there's four ways to play it. Okay, let's move on. You have the major, the minor seventh, and then you have a major seventh. Now, the E major seventh, if you play an E major, basically you want to take one of the root notes in there, preferably not the bass note, and lower it by one fret, and play the you know, it's a seventh note, so, a major seventh note. So in this case, if you look at on the D string second fret when you're playing an E major chord, that is the root note. That's an E. Okay, so how do we lower that one? We're going to have to move our fingers around. All right. So in this case, you want to lower that D string just by one note. So a couple ways you can do it. I tend to do it like this, where I'm, you know, it's open, ring finger on the A string, second fret, and then my index and my ring finger on the D and G string on the first fret. Okay, now that is an E major seventh. Okay, so let's bar it at the fifth. Okay, and now how are we going to do it? We know how to play the major, right? The A major or the E major shape. Okay, but we got that string that the pinky is on here, we got to lower it by one. So we're going to have to move the fingers around. So basically, I put the pinky on the A string second fret, and then these other two fingers on the D and the G on the first fret from the bar. Okay, and that is now A major seventh. Okay. The only thing about this, I don't use this a lot, because a major seventh, I always feel that major seventh note has to kind of stick out. And being that note there, you can hear it, but it doesn't really project as well as when you're playing it in the A shapes. Okay, but that is a major seventh shape, and depending on where that bass note is, now you know what it's called, or now you know the name of the chord. So that's an A major seventh, 2 frets up would be a B major seventh, 2 frets down would be a G major seventh. Okay, a couple other chords with the E shape. You have a sus4, and basically a sus4. If you look at an E major shape, okay, you want to take that third, okay, which, and again, you don't have to necessarily know at this point what interval each of these notes are, but you want to take this note right here and move it up. So you kind of want to play all three of these strings on the second fret. Okay, so it's going to be open, 2, 2, 2, open, open. And lots of times this sus4 resolves to the major chord. So it goes. And if we bar it at the fifth, all right, but that is, in this case, it's an A sus4, but it's that E sus4 shape. Okay. All right. What's maybe more common is an E7 sus4 to an E major or to an E7, and that would be where rather all three fingers on there, you're just playing open, 2, open, 2, open, open. And it normally resolves to that major. It could resolve to an E7 or a 7 dominant chord. Okay, and let's bar it at the fifth. And I employ my pinky and my ring finger, so I'm playing basically 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 5. It always sounds better, again, going to a major chord off of that. Or you could always just play that sus4 chord out. So again, when you're just fretting two of those strings, that would be a 7 sus4. If you're fretting all three strings, that's a sus4. Okay, there's a difference. So there's your sus4 chords. Now, when we get to the A's, which we'll move on to now, there is an A sus2, and we'll talk about that. But there's really not an easy way to finger an E sus2, so we're gonna skip that. So let's get to the A's. Okay, we're familiar with the A chord shapes in the open position. We have an A major. Okay, so let's go bar it at the fifth and play it. Now you can play it. I tend to play an A chord like this with one finger. I sort of take my middle finger and I sort of bend it. A lot of guys will employ three fingers, a finger for each string, so they can kind of do little suspended things. But I tend to use just one finger. It's just a habit. But if we play it up here and we bar the fifth, now what I do, and some guys again will use all three fingers that are free to fret each string. I just tend to use my ring finger, and bar the whole thing. Sometimes the high E may not ring true, but that's okay. I mean, that is a root note. That is a D note, or I'm sorry, it's actually an A note, so it's not the root. The A chord shapes that are barred, the root note is on that second string. Okay, so remember the E chord shapes, the root was on the E string. The A chord shapes, the root is on the A string or the fifth string. So in this case, when we're barring the fifth, you can play the low E string or you can avoid it, because lots of times you kind of want that root to be the lowest note. Okay, so in this case, on the A string, fifth fret, that's a D note. Again, learn the notes on those two strings. So if you're barring the fifth and playing an A major shape, the root is on the fifth fret, that's a D. So that is a D chord, okay? And many of you know this already, but that's kind of how you figure it out. Because when you get to these other, different shapes, it's always good to know what the chord's named. Okay, so you have a major shape. Okay, go back to where the A is. We have a minor shape. Again, maybe one of the first chords you learned. All right, played up here, bar, you get the fifth. Of course, D minor, right? Because now we're playing those A shapes, so that root is a D. Now, I tend to bar all 6 strings, and lots of times I'll play that A note, you know, if I'm playing at the 5th fret. But just be aware that if you avoid that the lowest string, it's okay, and it may even be better for the purpose that you're, you know, trying to play along with. All right, so that's your minor. Your minor 7th, all you're doing is you're picking up your ring finger, so you're playing basically. Well, you can play from the low E. It would be open, but they could be XX as well. You know, maybe you don't want to play them. It's really up to you, and depending, you know, what you're playing. But that 3rd string, the D string, is on the 2nd fret. Then it's open. Then it's 1 and open. Okay. So you can kind of hit that A note, or you can avoid it. All right. Same thing when you bar. So we're barring at the 5th again, playing that A minor 7th shape. Okay, and we are hitting the 5th string, or the A string, which is a D note. Yeah, so when we're playing that minor 7th shape back here, we are hitting the 5th string. It's just you may want to avoid that low note. Okay. But sometimes it sounds okay. Really depends. Normally it sounds okay. All right, so that's your minor 7th. Now a major 7th, if that is the A major shape, right, like that or like that, if you just take that G string, okay, and lower that by 1, because that's an A note, and we lower that root note by 1 note, now we have this little kind of pyramid, or this little triangle shape, where it's basically open, or X, open, 2, 1, 2, open. That's an A major 7th. And you can really hear that 7th, that major 7th note, you know, sort of stick out, unlike that E major 7th. That's why I say I tend not to play that E major 7th shape. But when you go from an A to an A major 7th, you really hear it. Okay, so let's bar it at the 5th and play that A major 7th shape. Play a major, play the major 7th. Okay, so that's always a good little progression, the major to the major 7th. Okay, so that's your major 7th shape, the A major 7th shape, barred at the 5th, root note on the 5th string, that's a D note, so that's a D major 7th. Then there's a A7 shape, okay, where we're just kind of playing that A major, but we're opening up the G string, and that G note is the 7th, or the flatted 7th, or the it's this minor 7th or the flatted 7th. All right, so you can bar it at the 5th again and play that A7 shape. This is what we call a dominant 7th, often just referred to as an A7. And played up here. Bass note is on the A string, and that's a D note, so that's a D7. So just know what the bass note is that you're playing for those two groups of chords. And then what else? Okay, so you have an A sus4 and an A7 sus4. Same thing, you know. The A sus4 is a major chord, so you play the major chord, but you go 1 fret up on that B string, so it'll be on the 3rd fret, okay, or 3 frets up from the bar, and that is an A sus4. And lots of times you resolve that to the major. Okay, and the A7 sus4 is basically, it's like a dominant 7th, where you're just playing that shape, and you're putting your pinky on that, which is the fourth. And you can resolve it to the A7 or the A major. Let's play it up here on the fifth. Okay, so all I'm doing is I'm just kind of playing open, open, 2, open, 3, open. And then I'm just sliding that pinky back. So I'm making it it's an A7 sus4 to an A7, right? Or you could go to the major, whatever you like. Okay, so they're the chords for the bar chords for your E's and A's that you should learn. But while you're at it, let's learn a couple other chords. And while we're on the A's, we'll do the A. So an A sus2 is like an A major chord, okay? But you're gonna let the B string, the second string, open. So it's just gonna leave you with fingering the D and the G string on the second fret. And it sounds like this. Okay, that's an A sus2. So let's bar it at the fifth. We know that we're up in D territory, and play that same shape. Okay, that's a sus2 chord. So you can play that anywhere. You know, you drop it down to, that's a C sus2. Kind of like a, I don't want to say haunting, but it's kind of like an alternative type of chord. All right, so that's your sus2 chord. A couple other chords, 3 other chords, and we'll finish up here. In the E family, we have what we call an E minor 7th, and an E minor 7th in the open position it's like an E minor 9th. It's kind of like an E minor 7th. In fact, it is an E minor 7th, but you're adding one other note there, which happens to be a 9th. And that would be fingered open, 2, open, 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 2. Sometimes the Allman Brothers end on this chord, but if you bar it at the fifth, play an E minor 7th, and then you put your pinky on that E string on the second fret from the bar. And you can slide that all around. But being in that E family, we know the root is going to be on that E string. So that's how you determine the name of the chord. Okay, so that's your minor 9th in the E family, or the E shapes, E minor 9th. Another pretty cool chord is this chord here, sort of Beatle-y sounding. Normally the Beatles, many times they would end on a 6th chord. This is actually a 13th chord, which is somewhat related to a 6th chord, but I won't get into that. But an E13 shape is like an E dominant 7th, where, you know, it's basically open, 2, open, 1, open, open. All right? That's an E7. But if you put your ring finger on the B string second fret, that adds a 13th note to it. Okay, so that makes it an E13. Well, this sounds pretty cool if you bar it at the fifth. Again, play that E7 shape, and in this case we're playing an A7, and then put your pinky on the B string second fret. And this always sounds good, kind of moving it down a whole step, or 2 frets, or up 2 frets. All right, so that's a 13 chord. You might not see a lot of those. It's kind of jazzy, but it is easy to play, so put that into your vocabulary of chords. And then lastly, and this is a chord I kind of stumbled upon figuring out the New Radicals song years ago, You Get What You Give. And basically, okay, it may sound familiar. So that chord basically, what do we call it? This is an E add 11. So an E add 11 is basically, it's the major chord. It's an E major, but you add an additional note to it. Okay, but the way it's fingered, it's fingered very easily. It's for in the open position, this would be an E add 11. It's open, open, 2, 1, open, open. So it's all right. But since we only need two fingers to fret two strings that are pretty close, let's try it barred up on the 5th. Okay, so at the 5th it would be 5, 5, 7, 6, 5, 5. And this also sounds good when you kind of drop it down a whole step or even up a whole step. Okay, a lot of cool chords. Again, that was an E add 11. Hopefully you got some knowledge out of this, bar chords, and some pretty cool chords that you can impress your friends with. All right, thanks for watching, and subscribe, comment. See you next time.